I never thought a simple Saturday afternoon could change everything. My friend had just left town for a week, leaving me with nothing but an empty apartment and a vague sense of boredom. I hadn't planned on seeing anyone, least of all his mother, someone I'd only ever met in passing, a few polite handshakes at birthday parties and family dinners that felt stiff and distant. Her name was Catherine. She was in her mid-40s, with this effortless kind of presence that made a room quiet down without her even trying. When I opened the door to her standing there, holding a small basket of cookies my friend had forgotten to mention, I almost dropped my keys. She smiled, not the polite, rehearsed smile of someone greeting a guest, but a soft, warm curve of her lips that reached her eyes. And for a second, I forgot how old she was, forgot that she was my friend's mother. All I saw was someone radiant, calm, and terrifyingly magnetic. "I thought you might like a little company," she said, stepping inside before I could even answer. Her voice had this quiet rhythm, a kind of casual intimacy that made it feel like she had read every unspoken thought I didn't even know I had. I nodded, words catching in my throat, and she laughed softly, the sound brushing against me like sunlight on bare skin. We ended up in the kitchen, leaning against opposite counters, the air thick with a kind of tension that made my chest tighten. She moved with ease, opening a window, letting in the faint smell of rain and the distant hum of the city. I noticed little things, the way her hair fell across her shoulders, the faint perfume that lingered like an echo, the way her eyes lingered on mine a second too long whenever she spoke. I couldn't tell if it was curiosity or something more, something electric threading through the quiet. I tried to act normal, joking about how my friend had left me stranded, but my voice sounded too loud, too sharp. She tilted her head slightly, a tiny smile tugging at her lips, and asked, "And how are you really?" The question wasn't just polite. It was probing, gentle, the kind that made you want to confess things you hadn't even realized you were holding back. I swallowed and found myself saying, "I don't know. Kind of lonely, I guess." Her laugh came again, softer this time, almost a whisper. She leaned on the counter closer, and the scent of her, warm, comforting, something undeniably grown up, made me forget to breathe. I realized I had been staring. Not because I meant to, but because something about her seemed inevitable, as if the universe had quietly nudged me into this room at this exact moment. There was a pause, the kind that stretches just long enough to make every heartbeat audible. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice failed. She met my gaze, and I caught the faintest flicker of, I didn't know. Recognition? Interest? Playfulness? All I knew was that my stomach twisted and my mind started running a mile a minute. Just as I was about to make a ridiculous joke, trying to break the spell, the sharp sound of the doorbell made both of us startle. Catherine's eyes widened slightly, and I felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation wash over me. Something about the way she looked at me, right then, made it impossible to look away. I knew, somehow, that nothing after this would be the same. The doorbell rang again, persistent this time, and I glanced toward it, heart thumping. Catherine tilted her head, her lips parting ever so slightly, and I realized that moment, our moment, was teetering on the edge of everything. And then, just as I took a step toward her, the sound of the door opening echoed through the apartment. After the doorbell incident, the quiet returned, but the room felt smaller somehow, as if the air itself was charged. Catherine moved to the couch, and I followed, hesitant, like a moth drawn too close to a flame I knew I shouldn't touch. She sat down, crossing her legs gracefully, and I caught the faint scent of her perfume again, something soft, floral, with an edge I couldn't place. My hands itched to brush against the fabric of the cushion, my fingers twitching at the thought of touching her, anything at all. But I didn't. I reminded myself, she was my friend's mother. Everything about this was wrong. "You always seem thoughtful," she said, her voice casual, but the way she said it made me feel exposed. like she could see through the cracks I tried to hide. I shrugged, trying to hide the nervous flutter in my chest. Not always, I admitted. Just sometimes. There was a pause, and she looked at me in that calm, unreadable way that made me feel simultaneously safe and terrified. I noticed a flicker of something in her eyes, a trace of sadness, or maybe regret. I get that, she said softly. Sometimes life doesn't give you many safe moments. I realized then that she wasn't just beautiful, she carried weight. Years of life that had shaped her, experiences that made her pause before smiling, hesitation before trusting. I didn't know what, exactly, had made her cautious, but I wanted to know. I wanted to be the one she let in, even if just a little. Have you been with anyone? I asked, voice lower than I intended, feeling the taboo of it even as it slipped out. Her laugh was quiet, almost shy. Not recently, she admitted. It's complicated. Life, expectations, mistakes. Sometimes it feels easier to just not try. She looked away, and for a brief moment, vulnerability shone through, an honesty that made my heart ache. I wanted to reach for her hand, but the fear of crossing a line held me back. Still, something inside me rebelled against reason. I found myself leaning just a fraction closer, my shoulder brushing hers, subtle but deliberate. You're different, she said, almost to herself. Then, looking at me again, she added, You remind me of someone I used to know, or maybe someone I wish I had known better. Her words lingered in the air like a fragile promise, a thread between us that could snap or hold tight. Memories started crowding my mind, laughter at family dinners, quiet moments when my friend had left me alone in her house, tiny glimpses of her kindness that now felt magnified. There was a pull I couldn't ignore, a magnetic tension that made my chest tighten. Every instinct screamed danger, but every heartbeat screamed desire. And then, without really thinking, our hands brushed as she passed me the tea she'd prepared. A fleeting contact, light and almost accidental, but it sent an electric shock up my arm. We froze, eyes locking, both aware of the intimacy in that single, meaningless touch. Neither of us spoke. We didn't have to. The air between us held everything: curiosity, risk, longing, and a quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted. I wanted to stay like that forever, suspended in the moment, but somewhere deep down, I knew the real test was coming. Could we navigate the desire without destroying the fragile balance between right and wrong? And as she smiled faintly, just enough to make my pulse race, I realized I was already losing that fight. I tried to tell myself it was just curiosity. Just a fleeting moment of boredom after my friend left. But the second time Catherine laughed at one of my dumb jokes, the tension between us made the air thick enough to choke on. I knew it, she knew it, and neither of us moved to break it. Then came the knock. Sharp, insistent. My heart leapt into my throat. Catherine's eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw a real panic flicker across her features. It's just the delivery, she said quickly, though her voice betrayed her. I opened the door to find my friend's roommate holding a package, grinning awkwardly. Your mom said to drop this off, he said, oblivious to the undercurrent that made the room feel charged. I forced a smile, took the package, and closed the door, but not before Catherine gave me a look that said, We shouldn't be here like this. We drifted back to the couch, but the near intrusion had only sharpened the tension. I could see her fingers trembling slightly as she set her teacup down. Her lips were parted, her chest rising faster than normal, and she avoided looking at me, though I could feel her eyes on me anyway. I shouldn't. She started, then stopped. Her voice faltered, as if she couldn't quite finish the sentence. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that none of this had to be explained, but the words stuck in my throat. I moved closer, hesitant, my hand hovering near hers. Catherine, I whispered, almost involuntarily, the sound of her name like a confession I wasn't ready to say aloud. She flinched slightly, and I froze, unsure if I had crossed a line. We can't," she murmured. The words were soft, almost pleading, yet the way her fingers lingered near mine betrayed everything she was denying. I tried to pull back, to remind myself of the boundaries, the absurdity of my desire. But when our eyes met again, the air seemed to hum with something dangerous, magnetic, impossible to ignore. My chest ached, and I realized how badly I wanted to bridge the gap between us, even if only for a moment. She stood abruptly, pacing a few steps, as if the movement would anchor her racing thoughts. "It's complicated. You know it is," she said, her voice tight with tension. "I can't, this isn't just about me or you. It's—" The words hung, unfinished, suffocating. I stepped closer again, drawn like a moth, reckless, knowing that one misstep could destroy everything. "I don't care," I said quietly, almost harshly. "I just can't stop thinking about this. About you." Her eyes softened, glimmering with an emotion I couldn't name: regret, longing, desire, fear. She shook her head, but the movement was slow, hesitant, like she was arguing with herself. And then, we were suddenly close. Too close. Her hand brushed mine again, deliberate this time, lingering long enough for my pulse to spike. I could feel the heat radiating off her, the tension in her body matching mine. For a heartbeat, it felt like everything had paused. A door opened down the hall, startling both of us. Catherine jumped back, the illusion shattered, leaving only heavy breathing, lingering glances, and unspoken words that pressed harder than any confession. I wanted to reach for her again. I wanted to close the distance we both pretended we didn't crave. But instead, we both froze, the room suddenly too full of possibility and danger, and neither of us moved first. The risk had never felt so tempting. The evening had stretched on, but neither of us had moved from the living room. The city lights spilled through the window, painting Catherine's face in gold and shadow, and I couldn't stop staring. Every little motion she made, brushing hair from her face, adjusting her sleeve, felt like a declaration, a challenge, a temptation I couldn't resist. I tried to convince myself to leave, to give her space, but the thought of walking away made my chest ache. She laughed softly at something I said, and something inside me cracked. The sound wasn't just laughter, it was warmth, intimacy, and a reminder that maybe, just maybe, she felt it too. Then the text came. My phone vibrated on the table. I glanced at it, a message from my friend. "Heading back tomorrow. Can't wait to see you." Nothing alarming, but it hit me like a jolt. The reality of what we were doing, what we could do, suddenly pressed down on me. I looked at Catherine. She caught my gaze, and I saw it then, a flicker of fear, almost jealousy, almost desire. Her lips parted, and she swallowed hard. "You know this can't happen," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I can't. I won't, I don't care," I blurted, more urgently than I intended. My hands twitched, and I leaned closer, closing the space she tried to create. "I've never felt this close to anyone. Not like this. And I can't pretend it's just wrong." She froze, her breath catching. Her eyes glistened, a mixture of longing and panic. She shook her head slowly, like she was trying to convince herself that she could step back. But then, unexpectedly, she stepped toward me instead, her hand brushing mine. Just a touch, almost casual, but charged with everything neither of us was admitting. "I shouldn't," she whispered, voice trembling. "But I can't stop thinking either." The words made my pulse race. My brain screamed caution, but my body betrayed me, leaning closer until our knees nearly touched. The air between us was thick, electric, impossible to ignore. Every thought of rules, of morality, of boundaries melted away with the warmth of her presence. I saw it then, her vulnerability, her fear, and something else, a hunger that mirrored mine. The moment stretched, silent and impossible, and I realized how much I wanted her to close the distance, to make the choice I was already incapable of resisting. A sudden knock at the door jolted us apart. Both of us flinched, the spell broken. Catherine stepped back, her hand lingering near mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary. The tension remained, a taut wire between us, vibrating with desire and danger. Her eyes searched mine, and I swear I saw every word we couldn't say reflected there: want, fear, regret, obsession, longing. And then she shook her head, half to herself, half to me, as if trying to anchor herself in reason. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. We stood there, suspended between what we could never admit and what we already wanted too badly. And then, the sound of the elevator echoed in the hall, doors sliding open, and footsteps approached. I froze as the elevator doors closed with a soft ding, leaving Catherine and me alone again. But the pause didn't last. My phone buzzed violently in my pocket. A quick glance, and my stomach sank. A photo had been sent to me. It was from my friend. The image was of Catherine, standing just like she had been minutes ago, but through a slightly ajar door. My heart hammered. Someone had been watching us. Someone had already seen the tension, the closeness. I looked at her, and the shift was immediate. Her eyes widened, a flush rising to her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but panic. "How?" she whispered, voice trembling. She stepped back instinctively, putting distance between us. "Who could have?" I didn't answer. Words felt useless. The air between us, once charged with longing and hesitation, now tasted of danger and exposure. Every unspoken desire was suddenly sharp, jagged, like glass underfoot. "Was it your friend?" she asked cautiously, suspicion and fear mingling in her tone. "I don't think so," I admitted, my voice low, tense. "But someone knows. Someone saw us." Her hands trembled slightly, fingers twisting nervously in her lap. The composed, poised woman I had been drawn to moments ago now looked fragile, exposed in a way that made my chest ache. I wanted to reach for her, to reassure her, but the gap between us felt insurmountable. "I should leave," she said abruptly, standing up. The movement was decisive, almost harsh, but her eyes betrayed the inner conflict, the same longing I felt, struggling to surface against reason. I stepped forward, trying to bridge the distance, but she shook her head, shaking off my hand before it could even reach her. "No," she said firmly, though the quiet tremor in her voice made it clear she wasn't fully convinced. "I can't, not now. Not like this." Her confession hung in the air, a delicate promise wrapped in fear. My mind raced. We were on the verge of crossing a line that couldn't be undone, yet something stronger than caution held us in place. Desire had collided with risk, and neither of us knew which would win. Then came a sudden knock at the apartment door, harder, louder this time. Catherine froze mid-step, her hand pressed to her chest. "It can't be," she murmured, eyes darting toward the entrance. I could feel my pulse in my throat, every instinct screaming danger, yet I couldn't pull away. There was a tension in the room, taut as a wire, that pulled me closer to her. She glanced at me, searching my face for guidance, for permission, for something to hold on to. And in that instant, everything changed. The door opened, and we both saw him, my friend, home earlier than expected, smiling obliviously. Or maybe not obliviously. His gaze flicked between us, and I caught something that made my stomach twist: curiosity, suspicion, something unspoken. Catherine's face drained of color. I stepped forward instinctively, blocking her slightly, shielding her with my body, even as my heart raced. Every breath felt borrowed, every second stretched impossibly long. We were caught. And the rules, the boundaries, the careful dance we'd been performing, had all just shattered. I swallowed hard, meeting her eyes. In that gaze I saw fear, desire, guilt, and something else, something I couldn't name, but couldn't ignore. And then he spoke. The room was silent except for our ragged breaths. My friend's presence was just outside the door, unaware, or maybe pretending to be, of the storm inside. Catherine and I stood frozen, bodies inches apart, every nerve screaming, every heartbeat dragging us closer and farther at the same time. She looked at me, eyes wide, lips trembling. This shouldn't be," she whispered, voice breaking under the weight of everything unsaid. "I know," I replied, my own voice hoarse. "I know it's wrong. But I can't pretend I don't feel this." Her hand hovered near mine, the air between us vibrating with unspoken permission, and for a fleeting second, I thought she would pull back entirely. But then her fingers brushed mine, deliberately, slow and electric. That single touch was a confession, a surrender, a defiance. "I'm scared," she admitted, whispering against the quiet hum of the apartment. "I'm scared of what this means, what it could destroy." "And I am too," I said softly, stepping closer, feeling the heat of her body without touching. "But maybe some things are worth the risk." She swallowed hard, eyes flicking down to our hands, then back up at me. Vulnerability and desire collided there, a raw, unpolished honesty that left me dizzy. I wanted to close the distance, to let every second of tension finally break, but the door, the potential consequences, the reality of the world outside reminded me that nothing was simple. Then she made a choice. Her hands slid into mine fully, entwining fingers, and she leaned just slightly closer. Not enough to kiss, not yet, but enough to tell me everything words couldn't. The warmth of her touch burned, and I felt a weight lift and fall all at once, relief, longing, and fear tangled into one. "I don't know what will happen," she whispered, resting her forehead against mine for a heartbeat. "I just know I can't ignore this anymore. I won't let go," I said, though the words felt too small for the intensity of the moment. And for that instant, the rest of the world didn't exist. There was no judgment, no rules, no shame, just us, tangled in the messy truth of what we were feeling. But reality was still lurking. The elevator's hum reminded us that outside, life waited. My friend, the apartment, the world, everything we were trying to ignore, was still there. And yet, for this suspended moment, the risk felt worth it. We lingered in the silence, hands still linked, breaths mingling, hearts racing, either ready to speak, either ready to move apart. I saw in her eyes a mirrored reflection of my own turmoil, desire and fear, hope and guilt, longing and restraint. And then she pulled back just slightly, just enough to let the weight of what had just happened settle. Her lips hovered near mine, the faintest brush of breath carrying the promise of what could be, leaving the rest unspoken. I wanted to close the distance, wanted to take that step, but something inside held me back, honor, caution, the shadow of consequence. We were caught between what we wanted and what we should do. And in that pause, I realized the truth: nothing could undo this feeling. Not the rules, not the fear, not even the world outside. She smiled softly, trembling, and whispered one word: "Later." The apartment was quiet again, but it felt different this time, lighter, warmer, charged with the knowledge that something had shifted irreversibly. Catherine and I sat on the couch, hands still intertwined, either speaking, but saying everything in the space between us. After a long, shaky breath, she rested her head lightly on my shoulder. I could feel the tension in her body ease, even if just a little. It was a small gesture, fragile and fleeting, but it held more meaning than anything either of us had said aloud. "I thought I'd never feel this, like this again," she murmured, her voice soft, almost like a secret meant only for me. I tightened my grip on her hand, feeling the heat of her skin against mine, and realized that I'd been waiting for this, waiting for her, for a connection that didn't fit neatly into the boxes life had drawn for us. "I've been waiting too," I admitted quietly, unsure if my words sounded as sincere as I felt. "Waiting for someone who actually sees me." She lifted her head just enough to look into my eyes. There was a tremor in her lips, a flicker of doubt, but also an undeniable warmth. "You do," she said simply, the weight of the confession lingering in the air like a fragile promise. We talked after that, slowly, in bits and pieces. About life, about fear, about the impossible choices we'd made. We didn't solve everything. There were still questions, boundaries, and consequences to face, but there was clarity now. There was understanding. There was the kind of honesty that only comes after a moment that could have broken everything. By the time the night deepened, laughter had crept into our conversation, tentative at first, then a little freer. We teased each other, shared memories, and even arguments felt lighter, more human. I realized that love, messy, complicated, unexpected, wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, even when the world said you shouldn't. When it was finally time to part, we lingered at the doorway, reluctant to let go. I brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and she leaned into the touch, just a fraction, but long enough for my heart to hammer. "Later," she whispered again, the word carrying both promise and patience. I nodded, feeling a rush of hope and relief. "Later," I repeated because it was enough, for now. As I walked back to my own apartment, I realized that life didn't have to be neat to be beautiful. The rules we'd feared breaking, the judgments we'd imagined, it all faded when the heart demanded its truth. And truth, messy and imperfect, could be the most powerful kind of freedom. So we began, cautiously, carefully, with laughter, touch, and stolen moments, building something real in a world that insisted we shouldn't. And now, after this story, I wonder, did you enjoy it? Did it make your heart race or linger in quiet thought? What kind of stories would you like to hear next? Stories of love against the odds, of second chances, or of moments that change everything in a single glance?